Radiation produced by nuclear weapons presents a revolutionary threat to our country.
You're talking to my people.
Right.
Now, let me tell you what's happening. What's happening?
The Guard, under the pressure of a rock-throwing attack, panicked and fired its weapons indiscriminately.
The 1960s are often referred to as turbulent, but that may be underselling it. A bumpy ride on an airplane is turbulent. The 1960s were an insane ball of ever-churning chaos. A decade marked by rebellion and upheaval in the worlds of politics, music, movies, science, and, well, just about everything else. And it all started in 1960, the year that saw the first patent for a laser, the first Grand Slam in a World Series, and Nixon and Kennedy duking it out for the soul of America in a presidential election, not mano a mano. Although that would have been entertaining.
If the present trend continues, Senator Kennedy will be the next president of the United States.
We're going to take you through the news, culture, sports, entertainment, and all that was weird in 1960, because this is Timeline. Hope you like doing the twist, because this one is all about 1960. But before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the Weird History channel and let us know what aspects of the 60s you're most interested to hear about in the comments below. Now, are you ready to learn what happened the year the Andy Griffith Show premiered?
You just listen to your Paul, son. You'll never go wrong on that.
The 1960s kicked off in the spirit of liberation as the colony formerly known as French Cameroon became independent from France on January 1st. Representatives of the UN, the US, and the USSR, all of whom had already agreed to recognize the new country, were on hand to watch as Cameroonian officials marked the occasion by lowering the French flag and replacing it with their own. After the revolution of 1952, Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser made a priority out of building a high dam across the Nile River. The project threatened countless archaeological monuments that line the Nile, and the ensuing controversy sparked an international effort to save as many as possible before construction began on January 9, 1960. The Aswan High Dam was completed in 1970 and is still one of the world's largest embankment dams. On February 1st, 4 black students initiated a sit-in at the Woolworths in Greensboro, North Carolina, with the aim of changing the company's segregational policy. They were soon joined by hundreds of sympathizers for what would become the most famous sit-in of the civil rights movement. On July 25th, after incurring over $200,000 in losses, the Greensboro Woolworths desegregated, inviting 4 employees to be the first black customers served at the lunch counter.
Signor, ma nella vita che vi piace di più?
What's the thing you like most in life?
I like lots of things, but there are 3 things I like most. Love, love, and love.
Construction of the Hollywood Walk of Fame began in 1958, but the walk wouldn't officially open until February 8, 1960. It would then be more than a month until the first official star, honoring High Noon director Stanley Kramer, would be installed at Hollywood Boulevard and Gower Street. On February 13th, France completed its first successful nuclear test, codenamed Gerboise Bleue. The test, which saw a plutonium bomb detonated on a steel tower, was completed in the Sahara Desert. An eyewitness later reported that the desert was lit up by a vast flash, followed 45 seconds later by an appreciable shock wave, and an enormous ball of bluish fire with an orange-red center, followed by a mushroom cloud. Only the US, Soviet Union, and UK achieved nuclear capabilities before France did. Since the French test, however, 5 other nations have joined the nuclear club. These include China, India, Israel, Pakistan, and most recently, North Korea on October 9, 2006.
What these firing of the rockets have done is they've isolated themselves further, and that's sad for the people of North Korea.
By 1960, Frank Sinatra had had enough of Capitol Records. So on February 13th, he founded his own label, Reprise Records. Sinatra's first recording for the label was the album Ring-a-Ding-Ding, which unusually featured only up-tempo numbers and no ballads. And it was after Reprise's first record was released that people started referring to Sinatra as the chairman of the board. On March 4th, after 20 years of marriage, Lucille Ball filed for divorce from her one-time I Love Lucy co-star, Desi Arnaz. The pair, by all accounts, were deeply in love and had 2 children, but due to Arnaz's alcoholism and womanizing, their relationship became tumultuous. Their divorce was one of the highest profile of the era.
Well, Elvis, that's our little welcome home gift. 2 years you lost while you were in the Army.
And looking back over it, I'm struck with the realization that maybe you didn't miss so much after all. As a matter of fact, what you seem to have lost is your sideburns.
In March of 1958, Elvis Presley was drafted. To his credit, the King performed most of his military service in West Germany, where he served in the 3rd Armored Division, rather than perform for the troops as part of special services, as most other drafted entertainers did.
I mean, everybody thought I wouldn't have to work and I would be given special treatment and this and that. But when they looked around and saw I was on KP and I was pulling guard and everything just like they were, well, they figured, well, he's just like us.
Elvis was then honorably discharged in 1960, on March 5th. More than 1,000 sailors lost their lives when the USS Arizona was attacked at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. A memorial was planned, but by 1960, less than half of the money required had been raised. Known for his generosity, the King agreed to stage a benefit for the cause at Hawaii's Block Arena on March 25, 1961. Only his second live performance in more than 3 years. Along with a personal donation from Presley himself, the concert raised enough money to complete the memorial.
This episode of Timeline is brought to you by...
When your Bronco Buster skins an elbow, instead of struggling with stinging tincture of iodine, now you can change this to this in a hurry with new Instant Mediquick, the complete first aid spray. Mediquick sprays away pain with xylocaine. Use Mediquick to prevent infection as you spray away pain. Mediquick takes the sting out of sunburn. Mediquick, the complete first aid spray.
In 1959, Fidel Castro seized power in Cuba by overthrowing dictator Fulgencio Batista. Castro's close relationship with Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, however, made the U.S. uneasy. So on March 17th, President Eisenhower approved a plan to train Cuban exiles for an invasion of their former homeland. The CIA believed Cubans would overthrow Castro and set up a U.S.-friendly government. And if you're wondering how that went, come back to the timeline about 1961. On March 21st in Sharpeville, South Africa, police opened fire on a crowd of roughly 5,000 people protesting an internal passport system designed to racially segregate the country. Protesters were told that they would be addressed by a government official, but instead, police fired nearly 1,400 rounds into the crowd, killing at least 91 and wounding at least 238. In 1959, producer Berry Gordy, tired of watching record labels profit off his work, started releasing his own recordings under the imprints Tamla and Motown. And on April 14, 1960, Gordy merged the two companies into one, which he incorporated under the name Motown Records. Motown would then score its first hit that September with Shop Around, recorded by the Miracles. Remember when we told you about Elvis getting drafted in 1958? Well, just 2 years later, on April 14th, Bye Bye Birdie opened on Broadway, and it was about an Elvis-like rock star getting drafted. It's notable for originating the standard Put on a Happy Face, and for being the first Broadway musical to include rock and roll in its score. Bye Bye Birdie was a massive success, so 20 years after it came out, someone decided it needed a sequel. That was a rare move for Broadway musicals then, and still is. And Bring Back Birdie might be why. The production drew scathing reviews and closed after just 4 performances. Shocked by the death of a high school student killed by police for protesting a rigged election, South Korean students and labor groups began a protest against President Syngman Rhee on April 11th in the city of Masan. It reached Seoul on April 18th, and the following day over 100,000 students marched in support. Police opened fire, killing 180 and wounding thousands. After that, Rhee's Minister of Defense demanded Rhee's resignation, which he received on April 26th. On April 24, 1960, a protest aimed to desegregate the beaches of the Mississippi Gulf Coast turned violent when white mobs attacked the black beachgoers, including women, children, and the elderly. Police stood by and watched, eventually arresting 10 times as many blacks as whites. The event was described by the New York Times as the worst racial riot in Mississippi history. On May 1st, the Soviet Union shot down an American U-2 spy plane and captured pilot Francis Gary Powers. The U.S. claimed the plane was a civilian weather research aircraft, but after the Soviets revealed they had captured Powers and extracted photos of Russian military bases from the wreckage, the Americans came clean. Powers was convicted of espionage, ultimately serving 2 years of a 3-year sentence, thanks to a prisoner exchange.
We must have knowledge of military forces and preparation around the world. No one wants another Pearl Harbor.
In 1957, President Eisenhower signed the Civil Rights Act of 1957, designed to enforce the voting rights of African Americans. That act, however, left several loopholes which states exploited to deny those rights. So on May 6th, Eisenhower signed the Civil Rights Act of 1960, which allowed for federal inspection of local voter registration, while establishing penalties for anyone who attempted to block another's attempt to register. On May 9th, the U.S. became the first country to legalize birth control pills when the FDA approved the sale of the Innovid 10 for contraceptive use. Despite the approval, the pill wouldn't be available to married women in all states until the Supreme Court's 1965 ruling in Griswold v. Connecticut, and to unmarried women until their 1972 ruling in Eisenstadt v. Baird.
I could no longer be satisfied or go along with an evil system. And in spite of all of this, I had to keep loving the people who denied me service.
February 13th saw the start of the Nashville sit-ins, a series of protests aimed at ending racial segregation at Nashville, Tennessee's lunch counters.
They come in and they sit down, and we're not used to them sitting down beside us because I wasn't raised with them.
And then they come in, sit down beside us, as any human being would do. You cause no violence, you have no angry words. It sort of helps to project the idea that here sits beside me another human being.
Over the course of the protests, roughly 150 students would be arrested, and the home of one of their lawyers would be bombed. However, thanks to negotiations between the protest leaders and the business community, those lunch counters started serving black customers on May 10th.
This episode of Timeline is brought to you by...
Hey, kids, look what's new. A brand new cereal just for you. Twinkles, the new star-shaped cereal in the storybook package. Taste those golden little stars, filled with the goodness of energy oats and corn. Remember, only Twinkles has the storybook package. Just tear the magic line, and your storybook opens. Twinkles, the new star-shaped cereal in the storybook package.
On May 11th, the Israeli intelligence service Mossad captured Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, who was hiding in Argentina. Tipped off by a German Jew living in Argentina who believed his daughter's friend was Eichmann's son, the Israelis abducted Eichmann near his home. They then held him in a Buenos Aires villa for 9 days before putting him on a plane to Israel to stand trial for his crimes.
Es war ein unglücklicher Mensch gewesen.
Eichmann would then be executed for those crimes in 1962. Paul McCartney met John Lennon in 1957 and joined John's band, the Quarrymen. Soon thereafter, they added George Harrison on guitar, Stuart Sutcliffe on bass, and Pete Best on drums. Sutcliffe suggested calling the group Beatles, spelled B-E-A-T-A-L-S. But the band instead called themselves the Silver Beatles, spelled B-E-E-T-L-E-S. They tinkered with the name until June 2nd, 1960, when they played their first show as The Beatles, spelled B-E-A-T-L-E-S. In 1952, American businessman Martin Bromley and his partners established Service Games of Japan to make gaming machines for U.S. military bases in Japan. The company was dissolved in May 1960 due to a criminal investigation. But on June 3rd, Bromley established Nihon Kikai Seizo, another game manufacturer doing business under the name Sega, a contraction of service and games. By the 1980s, Sega was making arcade games, but the sector hit a downturn in 1982, so they decided to explore the burgeoning home video game market. On July 15, 1983, the same day Nintendo released their Famicom, Sega released their first console, the SG-1000. Interestingly, Sega originally planned to include a keyboard with the SG-1000, but changed their minds when they heard Nintendo's system would be for games only.
Sega! Watch the door, please. Blasting off.
What did you do to your hair?
It was making me nervous, so I chopped it off. Big mistake, huh?
No, I sort of like it.
You got a lulu.
Huh? Yeah, better not get too close.
Watch your step. And watch your hands, Mr. Kirkby.
I beg your pardon?
One of these days, I'm going to shut these doors on you and...
In 1959, Alfred Hitchcock acquired the film rights to Robert Bloch's novel Psycho. Paramount, however, refused to provide the director with his requested budget, so Hitchcock opted to personally finance the movie, filming it in black and white with the considerably cheaper crew of his television series, Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Despite mixed reviews, Psycho, which opened June 16th, is now regarded as one of the greatest horror films of all time. Huckleberry Hound was created by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera in 1958 and debuted in that year's Huckleberry Hound Meets Wee Willie, the first episode of the Huckleberry Hound show.
No gorilla's gonna outsmart Officer Huckleberry Hound.
On June 20th, 1960, the series would win the Emmy for Outstanding Achievement in the field of children's programming, making it the first animated series to ever win an Emmy.
One book in the last few years has been so warmly embraced by tens of millions of people.
On July 11th, Harper Lee published her debut novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, which tells the story of Atticus Finch, a lawyer defending a black man accused of sexually assaulting a white woman. Despite its explicit themes and numerous efforts to ban it, the book became a massive success, winning a Pulitzer Prize in 1961 and being adapted into an Oscar-winning film in 1962. Inspired by a pencil mark left on a light switch through a decal, French inventor André Cassaigne designed a toy that used aluminum powder to create a similar effect on a piece of plastic. Best of all, the marks disappeared when the toy was shaken. Cassaigne called it the Magic Screen, but the Ohio Art Company renamed it Etch A Sketch, and their first model rolled off the assembly line on July 12th. In 1959, S.W.R.D. Bandaranaike, Prime Minister of the nation now known as Sri Lanka, was assassinated. On July 21st, 1960, history would then be made when his wife, Sirimavo Bandaranaike, was elected to the office, making her the first woman ever voted to the position of Prime Minister. She would be re-elected in 1970 and in 1994, when she would serve alongside her daughter, who was president. People think of Columbo, they think of Peter Falk, but the character actually first appeared on July 31st in an episode of the Chevy Mystery Show, where Columbo was played by Bert Freed.
Lieutenant Columbo, Doctor, police.
I don't understand.
Well, I think you better sit down. I have some bad news for you.
Falk wouldn't play the part until 1968, when he appeared in the TV movie Prescription Murder. In 1959, Hank Ballard wrote a song about a dance called The Twist. Dick Clark, a major force in pop music, noticed that dance catching on with teenagers and advised Ballard's label to have it re-recorded by the more mainstream Chubby Checker.
This one is a gasser. This is a pretty frightening thing. It's sweeping the country all over the place. Hottest dance sensation in the last 4 years, a thing called The Twist. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Chubby Checker!
Checker's performance of the song on The Dick Clark Show on August 6, 1960, then made it a #1 hit, igniting the Twist dance craze. On August 12th, NASA launched Echo 1, the first passive communications satellite. Echo 1 was a metallized balloon, which could be used as a passive reflector of microwave signals from one location on Earth to another. The first such transmission was sent from Goldstone, California to Holmdel, New Jersey, that very same day. August 12th was also the day Dr. Seuss published Green Eggs and Ham. Seuss, whose real name was Theodore Seuss Geisel, wrote the book after his editor bet him $50 he couldn't write a children's book using just 50 distinct words. That bet was worth about $530 modern dollars. And while Geisel found it difficult, he ultimately won. And by 2000, it had sold over 8 million copies, making it his most popular work.
Keep your eye on Danny Ocean. He's the guy with the big idea.
How'd it come off? Like a charm.
Oh, Danny, what a prize you are. The only husband in the world who'd proposition his own wife.
Well, I married you once and it didn't work out too well, so what's wrong with a little hey-hey?
But when Danny called, they came. And what they heard was a plan of independent initiative and individual enterprise to stir the spirit of every swinging citizen.
On August 18th, the Discoverer 14 spy satellite was launched from Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. The satellite then completed 17 circuits around the planet, in the process exposing 3,000 feet of film over the Soviet Union. Retrieving that film proved tricky, but once it was back in Air Force hands, it was developed, yielding the first photograph ever taken from a spy satellite. In 1960, Muhammad Ali was still using the name Cassius Clay, and on September 5th, he won the gold in the Olympic light heavyweight boxing event. Some reports hold he threw his medal into the Ohio River after being refused service at a whites-only restaurant and attacked by a white gang. Many of Ali's friends, however, dispute the story, claiming he simply lost the medal in 1961.
This episode of Timeline is brought to you by...
Oh, Chatty Cathy, oh, Mattel's famous talking doll. We pull the ring, and you say 11 different things. Let's play how. We can change your dresses now, goodness knows. now you got a wardrobe full of pretty clothes.
You'll find Chatty Cathy and her costume sets wherever toys are sold.
You can tell it's Mattel, it's swell.
It's the kickoff, and the American Football League is in Boston.
The American Football League, otherwise known as the AFL, kicked off its inaugural season on September 9th with a game that would see the Denver Broncos beat the Boston Patriots. Founded to compete with the older and more established NFL, the league would continue another 10 years before merging with the NFL, becoming the AFC in 1970.
Most people don't like to go to the dentist, but I rather enjoy it myself, don't you? No Novocaine. It dulls the senses.
This is gonna hurt you more than it is me.
Oh, goody, goody, here it comes. Oh, my God, don't stop now!
If you've ever wondered why Gene Roddenberry named Star Trek's flagship vessel after the real-life USS Enterprise, it might be because the Enterprise, launched September 24th, was the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier in history, and seemed fairly futuristic at the time. The ship would, among other things, play an important role in 1962's Cuban Missile Crisis, and fight in the Vietnam War before being deactivated in 2012. On September 26th, the U.S. presidential debate was broadcast live on television for the first time. The debate, which saw Senator John F. Kennedy take on Vice President Richard M. Nixon, was broadcast from Chicago. Kennedy, who appeared far more at ease before the cameras, was widely considered the winner by people who watched.
I don't want historians 10 years from now to say, these were the years when the tide ran out for the United States. I want them to say, these were the years when the tide came in.
While Nixon, who refused to wear makeup, was perceived as nervous. Kennedy versus Nixon may have been the first televised debate in history, but the most watched debate in history was the one between Senator Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, held on September 26, 2016, was estimated to have drawn 84 million viewers, edging out the 1980 debate between Reagan and Carter, which drew 80 million.
I got it, that's mine.
I got it.
Give me the phone.
I got it now.
Give me the
I've got it.
Hey,
will it have to be 2 falls out of 3 every time the phone rings around here?
Your grandfather's right. I'll take it.
I'm expecting a call, Dad.
Well, so am I.
Hello. Who? Yes, he's here.
I told you it was for me.
No, it's for me.
It's for Chip.
Chip. Me?
It's a girl.
Huckleberry Hound may have been the first animated show to win an Emmy, but the first one to air in prime time was The Flintstones.
Did you get your paper, dear?
Yeah, and I'm lucky. It only comes once a week.
Debuting September 30th, the show, which was heavily influenced by the Jackie Gleason sitcom The Honeymooners, was set in the Stone Age and followed the titular family, as well as their neighbors, the Rubbles. Despite very mixed reviews, it would last until 1966. On October 12th, during a meeting of the United Nations, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev pounded his shoe on a desk to protest a speech by Philippine delegate Lorenzo Sumilong. That speech claimed the Soviets had deprived Eastern Europeans of civil and political rights, so it's easy to see why Khrushchev was upset. But whether the legendary incident really happened is up for debate. No photographic or video evidence of it exists, and several witnesses claimed Khrushchev brandished his shoe but never actually banged it.
How can you talk like this? Your gun has got you everything you have.
Yeah, sure, everything. After a while, you can call bartenders and faro dealers by their first name. Home, none. Wife, none. Kids, none.
This is the kind of arithmetic I like.
52 individuals, including Martin Luther King Jr., were arrested at an Atlanta protest on October 19th. King and the others were protesting lunch counter segregation laws and refused to leave their seats at those counters. Charges against many of them were dropped, but King was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor. Thanks, however, to the intervention of presidential candidate John F. Kennedy, King would be released weeks later. Kennedy's intervention on behalf of King secured him an unprecedented percentage of the black vote, which turned out to be a crucial factor in the election. On November 8th, he would pull off a squeaker, defeating Nixon by just over 110,000 votes in the popular vote. That was good for an electoral victory of 303 to 219, making Kennedy the 35th president of the United States.
That I now declare that John F. Kennedy has been elected President of the United States and Lyndon Johnson Vice President of the United States.
On November 4th, screen legend Clark Gable known for his roles in films like It Happened One Night and Gone with the Wind, completed filming on the now classic contemporary Western, The Misfits, in which he appeared with Marilyn Monroe.
You a mechanic too? Him? He's a cowboy.
How'd you know?
I can smell, can I?
Hey, you can't smell cows on meat.
2 days later, Gable would suffer a heart attack. By November 16th, his condition seemed to be improving, but that evening he suffered a second heart attack and died at the age of 59. Ruby Bridges was just one of 6 black children to pass a test allowing her to enroll at the all-white William Frantz Elementary School in Louisiana. 2 of those 6 decided to stay at their old school, and 3 were transferred to a different white school, leaving Bridges as the lone African-American child to show up at William Frantz. For her protection, Bridges was escorted to her first day of class by 4 U.S. Marshals.
Ruby, were you scared? I would have been terrified.
I wasn't, actually, because, it's very hard for parents, I think, to explain to a 6-year-old what was actually happening.
A scene which was later commemorated by iconic American artist Norman Rockwell in his painting, The Problem We All Live With. On November 24th, NBA star Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain snagged 55 rebounds in a game against the Boston Celtics, setting a record that still stands to this very day. As amazing as that is, it's not the most impressive record Chamberlain set. Just 2 years later, in 1962, he would score 100 points in a single game, another record that has yet to be broken. Lunch counters were far from being the only segregated public facilities in 1960. For example, public transportation hubs, like bus terminals, were also segregated by race. Until, that is, the U.S. Supreme Court issued its decision in Boynton v. Virginia on December 5th. The court held that segregated bus stations violated the Interstate Commerce Act and were so integral to interstate commerce that the federal government could forbid discrimination at such terminals. Worth mentioning is that Boynton's case was argued by Thurgood Marshall, who would become the first black Supreme Court justice. Finally, on December 19th, the Mercury-Redstone 1A rocket was launched from Cape Canaveral in Florida. The objective was to qualify the rocket for space travel and qualify the flight system for launching a non-human living creature into orbit. And the mission was a success. The space race had technically begun in the late 1950s, but as 1960 came to a close, things were really getting interesting. And that's how 1960 ended, with the U.S. on its way to the stars, the apartment on its way to the Oscars, and legal segregation on its way to the dustbin of history. It's also so much you could be forgiven for thinking we covered the whole decade. But the truth is, the 60s had just begun, and you ain't seen nothing yet. See you soon for 1961. So what do you think, and which of these items did you find most interesting? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out some of these other timeline videos.